Our guest today is a native of Baltimore and a graduate of Harvard College. She came to Chicago in 1986 to attend Northwestern University's Kellogg Graduate School of Management, where she received her master's in management in 1989. Welcome, Carole Brown. Carole, come on up. Go ahead, sit down. Since becoming president of the Chicago Transit Authority in October of 1997, Frank Kruesi has worked to rebuild service and reverse more than 15 years of declining ridership. Mr. Kruesi's more than 30 years of public service has included service at every level of government, local, county, state, and federal. President Clinton nominated and the Senate unanimously confirmed Mr. Kruesi's appointment as Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy in the United States Department of Transportation. Previously, Mr. Kruesi served as Chief Policy Officer for the City of Chicago for Mayor Richard M. Daley. He is a graduate of Middlebury College and received a master's degree in social sciences from the University of Chicago. Welcome, Frank Kruesi. Frank?
Thank you, Jay. Before we get started, there are a few people here that we would also like to acknowledge. First, for me, are two of my other board members who have served with us through some difficult times and difficult times to come, Reverend Charles Robinson and Mr. Harry Chandler. We also have two of our Citizens Advisory Board members here, Mayor of Olympia Fields, Lindsay Jones, and the Mayor of Skokie, George Van Buren. And finally, in addition to serving as CTA Chair, I'm also a director with the Regional Transportation Authority, and one of my fellow directors, Mr. Michael Rosenberg, is also here. And then we have so many people who help to move the trains and buses to and from each day, and even though we're criticized all the time, they do a wonderful job, and so many of them are here, and so I'd like everyone from CTA who is here to please stand. So, you know, we decided to do this, and then we've had to figure out how we were going to actually do it. And speaking as a pair, you know, Frank and I never agree on anything, and so to actually come together and actually speak was going to be a challenge. And so we decided that instead of doing a formal speech, what we would do is we would ask and answer the questions that we're asked and answered most frequently, and then we would invite you all to join in and ask us any questions that come to mind from what I hope is the discourse that we have. So I'm going to start, and I guess the question that I'm going to ask Frank is the question that I hear most frequently, and that is, Frank, how are the two of us getting along?
You know, it's funny, when this was announced, the first question that Jim Riley asked both of us was whether this was going to be a debate. And I'm sorry to disappoint people, it won't be. But if you're disappointed, you can talk to Jay after this, and he'll be happy to give you a full refund, right, Jay? Yeah, he did not acknowledge that, so just I will say that that's probably not the case. In any event, I would describe our relationship using an old nursery rhyme, which is really quite nice, I think, which is Jack Sprat. You may know this. Jack Sprat could eat no fat, his wife could eat no lean, and so between the pair of them, they licked the platter clean. And this is not about what we're taking from the platter, but rather what we are bringing to the table. And that is very different and I think complementary abilities, characteristics, and experiences, which I think has resulted in us being a very strong team. It's one that we've done a lot of things, which hopefully we'll talk about together, that have been, I think, very important. And we also, between the two of us, make important decisions. For example, the question of whether the new line was going to be silver or pink. And of course, I like the silver. And of course, knowing my great fashion sense, it was a very easy choice. It's pink. Anything else you want to add to that? You notice we're both wearing pink, and a little bit of silver too, but only a little bit.
And I'm going to go to the next question. The next question is, why are we here? Why are we here again this year? Didn't we just tell our story? Didn't the General Assembly bail you out last year? What can't you people ever get by? So I want to say that we're grateful that the General Assembly did recognize the need to invest in public transportation last year. As most of you know, they did infuse $55 million into our budget through the funding of paratransit. They also put forth that we would find a permanent funding solution for paratransit, and that PACE at the beginning of July of 2006 would take over paratransit delivery of service from the CTA to help alleviate our budget pressures. So we balanced our budget in 2005 with that $55 million. In 2006, we balanced our budget with two extraordinary events. The first was half of the paratransit money for half of the year, and the other was something that, as an investment banker, makes me cringe. We transferred about $40 million from capital to operations. So we're not out of the woods. We were told that the General Assembly would need 18 months to craft a permanent solution. We are taking the General Assembly at their word. We're taking the governor at his word, and that they're going to come up with a long-term solution for public transportation. But it hasn't happened yet. And so the reason we're here again is because we need to remind everyone that it's still important that our budget is not balanced through any long-term solution, and that if we don't have a long-term solution, we'll be back next year talking about service cuts and fare increases. So how many of you took the CTA to work today? I can't raise my hand, I'm sorry. So I think you then understand the importance of transit. And I know that Frank was on the Dan Ryan this morning, and I think that even though, as far as I know, everything went smoothly, Frank can articulate why even someone who is in a car should care about transit.
I think people took seriously the warnings that were issued, so it was pretty light all the way around. But I would suggest people remember Jack Spratt and his wife, namely that transit users and automobile drivers both benefit from the use of transit and a strong transit system. When you consider that on the Dan Ryan corridor, 29% of the people on that corridor are using transit every day, you realize how important it is for that area. And you can see similar kinds of and even higher rates of usage as a percentage. To put it in a sort of context, an 8-car train in rush hour is carrying 1,100 people, which is the same as a line of cars from the Loop to 95th Street. So people around the Dan Ryan should think about that every time they see one train go by in rush hour. That's a lot of folk. Similarly, a 40-foot bus carries 70 people, which is equivalent to a line of cars 4.5 blocks long. So when you're in the arterials that are the alternative to the Dan Ryan, think about that when you see a bus go by in rush hour. The fact of the matter is that the service matters. It matters to both transit and non-users alike.
I think the Dan Ryan Challenge shows why people in the suburbs and people who drive to and from work every day should care about transit itself. You'll see from this chart that the CTA is the largest suburban transit carrier in the region, so we carry more people in the suburbs than either Metro or PACE. You'll also see from the next chart that congestion costs the region over $4 billion a year. Transportation is important not only to the economy, it's also important for clean air and clean water. what I've said in other speeches is how other areas like Denver, like Houston, are investing more in their transit system, subsidizing at a higher rate. We're subsidized by the government at about 50%. Denver's subsidizing their transit system at about 85%. I think anyone who saw what was going on in New York for just 3 days of no transportation, no public transportation, can see how important it is to a region and how it can really stagnate the growth economically, whether you're in a car or whether you're on a bus or a train. So hopefully I've convinced you why it's important, and I wonder, Frank, if you could tell people what we can do about the traffic congestion.
Well, reality is, when you think about it, we used to have a competitive advantage in this region with the strength of our transit system. When I say our transit system, I mean the CTA, Metro, and PACE and its predecessors. And that was true both nationally and globally. But the reality is others are passing us by. And they're doing that because they are investing significantly in transit growth, and in transit ridership growth. If we're serious about the economic competitiveness, and we're serious about stopping traffic congestion from getting worse in this region, never mind things such as Dan Ryan expressway reconstructions, the kinds of things that have to be done from time to time. Just to maintain the status quo, this region is going to need to have 1 billion transit riders by 2017. We're about at 600 million now. So in order to get there, that's a major, major commitment to increase ridership. To achieve this goal, I suggest the CTA, Metro, and PACE will need to grow at an average rate of about 6.7% over 2005 levels over the next 10 years. Now, that's a minimum to stop traffic congestion growth, but the real trick then is going to be to actually see it decline. You know, when you think about 461 million rides that the CTA provided last year, it sounds like a lot until you think back to my high school years, 1968, when the CTA provided 727 million rides. It does so much fewer for the simple reason that there is fewer transit that's around now.
Doesn't look as bad as... No.
I wanted to keep that a surprise for Carole, and he succeeded. That was me in 1968. That wasn't the point I wanted you to think of. I wanted you to reflect on the fact that there was it was the Beatles, you know. I mean, you know, hello and goodbye. You know, Marvin Gaye was actually #1, though. You know, heard it through the grapevine. So those were the good old days. How old were you in 1968, Carole?
I was 3.
Who would have thunk it, huh?
But one of the one of the things that I had mentioned earlier was that we get about 50% of our funding from government subsidy. The other 50% comes from fare box revenue. I wanted Frank to walk everyone through the funding formula and when we talk about what we would like to see change, is the simple distribution of funds to the CTA.
Yeah, this is the simplified version, and I understand Jay's serving supper tonight, so no, seriously, this is a simplified version. The long and the short of it, it's not simplified. The other long and the short of it is that the fact of the matter is there are a lot of factors that go into the distribution of money for transit in this region, but none of them have anything to do with transit, which is sort of an interesting thought. It's that very point that is responsible for the situation that we're in. It's very complicated. It's hard to understand. The bottom line has been problematical in ways in which we'll go through. So that's the real short version of that. If you want to see it, it's on our web, and we'll be happy to give you a tutorial on it. But that's why it is complicated. It is why there's a problem. And that's just largely on the operations side. There's a little bit there in discretionary capital, but most of this is on operating. On the capital side, we have at the CTA about $1 billion a year need in order to get to a state of good repair and to make some modest improvements overall. That's short about $400 million a year overall in the last few years. So we've got ourselves a problem. Now, I'd also like to talk about one thing that's significant, and that is the cost per trip. Do we have that? If you look here, and it's just worth noting, how much it costs in the RTA in terms of, or put more bluntly and correctly, the public, to subsidize each ride in transit. And the bottom line is, it's a lot, and it varies from where one is, because obviously the distances are different and ridership patterns are different. The bottom line is, in general, I think it's fair to say the region benefits in different ways in different areas, but all significantly as a region on the investment of transit.
Before we leave this chart, if you'll note, there's a 1% sales tax in Cook County and in suburban Cook County and the city of Chicago. It's a 0.25% sales tax in the collar counties. And what we're saying is that a cost in for a CTA in Chicago is 87 cents. A ride in the collar counties, the subsidy is $3.63. And so what we're saying is that the Cook County, especially suburban Cook, is really subsidizing transportation services in collar county regions. And that is because the formula is 23 years old. And it doesn't address and hasn't grown as the region has grown. And I think Jim Riley and Steve Schlickman are here, and they were both intimately involved in the development of the MTA Act in 1983. And they will tell you, I think, that when the formula was devised, it was supposed to last for 5 years. It was supposed to take CTA in the region through 5 years, and that there was the thought that it would be revisited at the end of that 5 years, and it's lasted for 23. If you look at what CTA's purchasing power is, since 1983, it's just 80 cents. So our public funding has eroded by nearly 1% per year. And if we had just kept up with inflation, we would have received $1.5 billion more for public transportation over that same time period. And so that's why we're saying it's time to look at the formula, look at how this region invests in public transportation, and make adjustments for the changes that have been going on in the region. Given that, I think people ask us why it took so long to reach crisis. Why are you just talking about this now? Some people think we just started talking about it when I got here. And I think we need to explain what we've done, because we've known the structural deficit has existed for a while. And CTA has done certain things to deal with it internally. Frank?
Thanks. We've actually had to deal with this through a lot of things. Back when I first came to the CTA in 1997, 10% of the service was eliminated. That was my first workday. It was a very interesting day back in October of 1997. But since then, we've also worked very hard to improve efficiencies, and we've done it to such an extent that since 1997, which is what I pay most attention to because that's when I came here, we've saved over $1 billion worth of costs, largely through administrative efficiencies, and we've been working that on a never-ending process each and every year. That comes down to the savings that we've been able to do on a cumulative, or on an annual basis of $120 million a year, which has been 25% of the total public subsidy. So the reason the crisis has not been as public as it might have been is because we've dealt with it internally. We've made every dollar go as far as we can, and we've understood this is a never-ending process in any public organization. And we've done that, and we've worked it. But the bottom line is we are where we are. We've also increased fares. And if we compare the increase of fares to what's happened, ours have actually gone up 122% higher than the rate of inflation. So our customers, in fact, have given, and they've given at a higher rate of inflation. Higher fares provide a disincentive to use transit. And again, if we want to encourage people to use transit, we want to have lower fares. I see Alderman Nateris just arrived, and he's had a recommendation to have fares at $1 a ride. That would have the advantage of a tremendous increase in ridership. There's no question. That may end up being what it takes to get 1 billion rides or more, but it takes public funding to make that difference to allow us to run that service.
The other thing that we the CTA's done over time is to defer their pension obligations. And I know that you all may have read or about our pension fund going bankrupt in 2012. The Civic Federation did a great study on looking at the local government pension funds, and they were particularly concerned about ours, and they should be. You know, we are reaching a point with our pension obligations where the plan will have to address the health care obligations this year. And we cannot continue to balance our operating budget using pension deferrals. We have a systemic structural deficit. We took 10% of our capital dollars and transferred them to operations. You see what's going on with our pension plan. We've deferred contributions. That's how we've managed to balance our budget. It has not been through the growth in government subsidy. It's been just the opposite. And so, again, we're reaching a point of crisis, and that is why we continue to talk about it. And although we continue to keep our trains and our buses going, we're doing it at a cost. And we're not sure how much longer we can do it with the size of the system that we have. I think that leads to the question that people ask us a lot, which is, if you're in such a dire straits, why are you investing so much in capital? Why are you doing this big Block 37 project? Why are you rehabbing the Brown Line? Why did you just finish the Blue Line, and what are you doing on the Red Line? Why are you investing all this money in capital if you can't operate your system?
Well, there are lots of reasons, and there are separate reasons for each one. But, for example, the Brown Line's 100 years old. There aren't many transportation infrastructure project things that last 100 years. It needs to be revamped, and it needs to be expanded, because we're seeing a lot of additional ridership. The Douglas Branch was in danger of actually being closed. It was in such bad shape. What used to be called the Blue Line is now I'm happy to report, the Pink Line. What we've done on the Red Line is been dealing with the fact that we're running longer trains twice as frequently as when the Red Line was opened in 1969. And so we're in the process of redoing that. We've increased the power, we've increased the ride comfort as ways to increase the use of transit. Block 37 is an extraordinarily important initiative for us, because it provides, among other things, an additional important link of the Blue Line to the rest of the system, and also because it is an opportunity for us to contribute again to the region by providing a good transit link, and, as I believe, is a moneymaker for the CTA as we go forward too. One thing that Carole didn't mention, she was much too polite to do that, is why on earth would we have built a new headquarters building if we were in such dire strait? The real answer to that is because, as a result of that, we've done two things that are important. One, we have combined offices into one central location with the efficiencies of that. But secondly, we have saved $7.7 million a year over paying rent. And we've done that with using capital funds rather than operating money, which is very near and dear to us for reasons that Carole's explained. Sure.
I also wanted to add that we also are kind of taking government officials at their word when they say that they will leave no federal dollar on the table. So part of the expansion projects are projects that are part of TLU and our New Start projects. And so we believe them when they say, if you get the federal money, we will match it. And so we're counting on the state and local match. We're counting that on the fact that we will be able to have our Pink Line done, our Circle Line done, to extend the Red Line, to be able to look at the Ogden trolley and the extension of the Orange Line. We are expanding service into the West Side. If we can do that, if we can look at ways to better connect our service on the West Side, then PACE can look at ways to expand in the collar counties, and so that we really do have a regional transportation system, and that's really what we're looking to do. And so we are continuing to hope for investment, but at the same time, we're very worried that we're not going to be able to run our system unless we get the government officials to really take a hard look at how we invest in transportation in this region. And that leads to the other question or criticism that I hear a lot, which is, why don't you just raise fares? Why don't you raise fares to pay for your service? Why don't you institute distance-based fares or rush hour fares? And Mike Schiffer could talk a day and a half about this, but Frank only taught like a minute and a half.
I take that's a very strong suggestion on your part. The key thing to remember is the purpose of having public transit is to encourage the public to use transit. And if you have rush hour premium service, at the very moment you want to encourage the most use of transit as a way of reducing congestion or avoiding the additional pressure on the roads, you're doing just the reverse. If you want people to use transit, make it attractively priced. And remember the slide we showed earlier, that our fares have gone up 122% compared to a 100% baseline for the cost of living since the early 1980s, which goes to show that our customers have increasingly paid the portion of transit. So it really is a question of if there's a need for more transit, if there's a support for more transit for those who don't use transit but want to have a less congested environment, then you have to pay for it. It's as simple as that. Now, distance-based fares make a lot of sense for a system like Metra that really does go a long distance. But the point behind the CTA system, which is not primarily a commuter rail system, but rather is a both bus and rail system, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is to encourage the use of the system on a grid pattern, is the way we have our system set up. So we want to encourage short hops and long hops. A ride on a transit system is an automobile ride deferred, or put differently, it's not the car in front of your car. Now, Carole, you sit on the RTA board as well as chair of the CTA board, and I'm wondering why both Metra and PACE are not talking as much about transit funding and problems as the CTA is. And why is... That was the easy one. And isn't the CTA simply asking for more money from PACE and Metra?
And I think I've consistently said that we're asking for a greater investment in transportation to the region. I think Metra and PACE have talked about the problem, just not quite as loudly as we have. Metra has more operating dollars than they need. They would like to be able to use some of their formula monies for capital. They would like to be able to leverage some of their operating dollars for capital because they'd like to be making a greater capital investment. They can't under the current construct of the Act. PACE has said publicly, said at the Hamos hearings last year, that without greater funding, that they were going to have to revamp their entire system and reduce service maybe by as much as 50%. I think you see with new leadership at RTA, with Steve and with Jim Riley, that you've seen a consistent message of we need to have regional cooperation, but also a greater regional investment in public transportation. I think that's why the RTA has launched its strategic plan so that they can make a convincing case to the General Assembly and to the leadership that what we need is greater investment in public transportation. We're not going to build our way out of this through roads, and I think you see all of the service boards speaking from the same page, probably for the first time in a very long history. This is also the point usually where people ask, why don't we get more money from the city? Why isn't the city giving us more than $3 million that we get from them statutorily?
It's really one of the most interesting misinformation points out in the whole transit debate. The fact of the matter is the city of Chicago does contribute far more than $3 million. And the $3 million is, as Carole noted, a statutorily required amount of money, just as Cook County is required by state statute to provide $2 million a year to the CTA. The fact of the matter is that we receive an awful lot more than that. The University of Illinois conducted a study last year for the Illinois General Assembly that showed that the RTA sales tax and fares collected in the city of Chicago paid for almost exactly the level of CTA service provided in the city, $654 million. In addition, the city pays for the mass transit police for the CTA, which is well in excess of $20 million a year, and we thank the elected officials from the city of Chicago for that, and the aldermen here. And in addition, Mayor Daley, as a strong supporter of transit, has seen to it that since 1989, it's contributed in excess of $800 million in capital programs that have benefited the CTA directly for the CTA. That's a serious commitment. It's really the Cook County suburbs that are getting the short end of the stick. The University of Illinois found that suburban Cook exports between $100 and $130 million annually to pay for Collier County services.
So Frank's going to get mad at me, but I think we've made the point, and so I'm cutting this off. So I think we've made the point that we need greater investment in public transportation. I think we've made the point that we're trying to work collectively, both he and I, which is a challenge sometimes, as well as with the other service boards, because we think the issue is so important. I started out saying to some friends that this could either go really well or really badly, us doing this together. I hope it wasn't that bad, but we'd be happy to take any questions that you all might have. Alderman Nateras.
You know, and I know, that the trouble of mass transit is mindset. Mindset. If you go out today and drive along the tollway and the highway, all they're doing is laying concrete and making the roads wider and wider and wider so that more automobiles can travel in and out of our various cities. Unless the national government, the state government adopts a policy that we're going to go on rail and emphasize rail, we're never going to make it. Now that's what the whole problem really is an emphasis on rail. I said this almost to the point of being so redundant. We have an excellent opportunity to build a comprehensive mass transit system by using the railroad tracks all over the city of Chicago. We have more railroad tracks than anywhere else. The advantage of that is you don't have to go in and condemn right-of-way. The right-of-way is there. The only problem is we have a very strong lobby in this country called the railroad. And the railroads are not interested in public passenger transportation. They're only interested in hauling freight. And until we can change that mindset and enter into partnerships with them, we're never going to make it. Now, that's the whole problem with the funding. That's the whole problem with the service and everything else. And that isn't a question, it's a statement.
I was going to mention that, but but I agree with you, Alderman. I think that was one of the goals of CREATE, was to invest more in the rail system so that, and they could hopefully be incorporated into mass transit. But, you know, we have to work on the things that we have some control over. And so what we have control over is trying to get a message out that there needs to be greater investment in public transportation in this region, that the three service boards need the attention of public officials and of our elected officials now, and that we can't build our way out of it, and that congestion is only going to get worse unless we have a greater investment in public transportation.
I would ask anybody who has questions to please go to the microphone in the back there and state your name for the record and for the cable TV show. So if you ever want to be on TV, here's your moment. There's a whole lot of people coming to the mics, which is, I think, a good sign. Please state your name before you begin your question.
Hi, I'm Ellie Wilder, a member of the City Club. Could you tell me if any studies have been done as far as the relationship between mass transportation and air quality and pollution?
Was it the Texas Transportation Institute just did a study saying the impact that the number of cars were having on the environment, and that we needed to get more cars off of the roads, more people in transportation, because of the negative effects that the increased number of cars on the highways were having on the environment. And so yes, there have been studies. I'm not well versed in them, but the correlation is clear, and it has been made.
let me make, if I may, just a couple of things. One of them is the CTA is also the first user in the Midwest of ultra-low sulfur fuel. So we're doing our part in public transit in lots of ways to reduce pollution, and we are, after all, an extreme non-attainment. In that light, I would suggest that the train line might be called the electric pink line because it runs on electricity.
Bob Manor with a City Club member. Excuse me, it's been 3 months since you eliminated the transfer and caused some of your riders to pay what they consider a double fare to take 2 units of transportation. Do you have any information on the effect of this change in those first 3 months?
Yes, we have essentially driven out most of the use of cash on the system. We're down to 7%. Back just a few years ago, it was over 60%. So we are actually getting national attention. I was down in Atlanta recently explaining what happened there. People are astonished by it. What happened is people moved away from cash into the fare media that allow us to be more efficient, both in the operation of the service and also in not having to pay for the cost of counting the cash. So our customers understood something that people who don't ride but had strong voices didn't.
Has it reduced revenue overall?
No, it has not reduced revenue. It's increased revenue. Our projections have been that it would increase it by $17 million. If people had not changed their behavior and not shifted to other fare media, we would have gotten about $82 million as a result of that. So instead what's happened is people have gone to better value fare media and ridden transit more, which is what we wanted and expected to see happen.
David Hudson, I'm a City Club member. One of the things that your slideshow makes very clear is that the funding formula is skewed to favor the collar counties. Now, I assume the collar counties know this, and given their relative political strength, what message do you have to them that's going to get them to voluntarily give up their advantage?
Notice I gave her the microphone.
Well, one of the things that if you talk to any of the leadership in any of the is that they want greater public transportation opportunities in their region as well. They would like to see suburb to suburb commutes. They would like to get away from what they call the hub and spoke, where everyone's commuting into the city, and they like to have greater investment in public transportation in their region as well. So we think that, again, RTA has launched this strategic plan, and I think one of the goals of the strategic plan is to get the voices of all of the stakeholders in the region and to come up with a transportation plan that meets everyone's needs so that we can make the case that there needs to be greater investment from those collar communities.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Alderman Terrace, any questions? Alderman Terrace says he thinks they did a great job. I agree. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.